I'll tell you a quick story about my dad. I'm Little Mike. My dad was Big Mike. Oh yeah, and he was big. He was a big guy. He had a bar downtown LA on Skid Row, 5th and Los Angeles, which is a tough part of town. He was all tattooed up. He had a tattoo on his forearm that said Mother. He had a wolf with a broken nose on his left shoulder. And that's a man that had stories to tell. Handsome man. He had an accident when I was about 3 or 4 years old with a skill saw. He cut off his middle and index finger and part of his thumb on the right side. Shoot! One of my earliest memories is that hand being wrapped in the towel and taking him into the hospital. And he's in great pain, and he's trying to calm me down because I was freaked out. He favored that arm for about a year, and his arm withered and got skinny. So then he decided he's going to go work out, lift weights. You got to remember, this is at a time when people said if you lift weights too much, you're going to be gay, or you're going to be muscle man. You won't be able to run. Your heart's going to explode. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff that misinformation. One of my earliest memories is I went with my father to Big Tanny's, which was a chain at the time. It was on the corner of Whittier and Atlantic, and I lived about 2 blocks from there. And I remember I had to be very young because I was standing looking at the weight stack, and the weight stack was eye level. So I had to be 3 or 4 years old. And I remember him admonishing me with those 2 stubs. That's also how you could tell when he was mad, is he pushed those 2 stubs into your chest. Then you knew you were in big trouble. I remember him telling me, don't get your fingers too close or this will happen to you. And I stood there like this while he worked out like a statue. And I also remember the men's locker room, everybody was wearing around their underwear, and I couldn't process that either. So it was an interesting early memory. But my dad took the weight training part very seriously. In fact, he not only did rehabilitate this arm, but my dad wound up bench pressing about 400 pounds. This is back in the early 60s. When the world record was maybe 500 or a little bit more, and he did that with a couple fingers missing. So he was always known as Big Mike. Always wore cowboy boots, big guy, shirt unbuttoned to here. He had cowboy shirt, 2 pockets. He had a pack of cigarettes in each pocket. The only time he didn't have a cigarette going was when he was pumping iron. God's honest truth. And one thing about my dad was he was never afraid of anything. I remember once we went to a place called the B-Bag on Whittier Boulevard. I don't know if you guys are familiar with that in East LA. And there was a whole bunch of bikers there. And they were up at the counter, and I was scared. My dad could see I was scared. I was like 11 or 12 years old. And the fact that I was scared pissed him off, pardon me. So he went in the midst of these guys, he went up to the counter, spread them all out, looked at them both in the eyes, and he was such an intimidating character, there was no questions asked. Not until something happened in his life. He retired. He had paid off about 40 units of apartments. He had worked hard and earned every penny that he got. And about 2 years after his retirement, they had a great time. He went and got an exam. He didn't go to the doc much, but he went and got an exam. They found a tumor in the mediastinum, which is the area in between the lungs, the size of a baseball. See, my dad smoked 3 packs of cigarettes a day from the time he was 13 until that time, which I believe he was about 70 at the time. And it frightened him to some extent, enough to get him to quit smoking. Now, my dad was a man that ate nothing but red meat. It wasn't dinner unless it was red meat. So if Mom made chicken for the rest of us, he had steak. He didn't have spaghetti for dinner, and he had to have a half a loaf of bread with him at every meal. Terrible. What we did with him was very challenging. I got my dad on a juice fast. We did everything that they're doing in the Mexican clinics. It was a month after the initial diagnosis was made, they were going to start radiation. It was bronchogenic carcinoma, which is the top 2 malignant types of carcinomas that there is. So they were going to get him ready for radiation. They were going to give him a little tattoo hatch mark where they were going to irradiate him and start the chemotherapy. Well, they did an x-ray, and guess what? Tumor was gone. Yep. No evidence of it. Well, they were kind of baffled. You're talking to them about whether or not it had anything to do with the regimen that we put him on. Of course, they saw no connection. But they wanted to put him on what's called a maintenance dose of chemotherapy, just to make sure, just in case. So once a month he'd get chemotherapy, even though there's no sign of the tumor. And every month they did that, I watched him die a little bit. and I watched him turn from the most imposing, intimidating human being that I still to this day had ever seen. I watched him shrink into a scared and withered man. And during this process, I went to Norris Institute, which is attached to USC Medical Center. And I talked to the head oncologist there that was overseeing my dad's treatment. I couldn't understand the rationale. He's never had any trace of the cancer. It was gone before he gave him the chemotherapy, and the chemotherapy is killing him. Why does he have to continue? And the best answer that he could give me was, just in case. See, it wasn't too long after that, his platelets and bone marrow had been so destroyed that he bled to death internally. Cause of death? Iatrogenic disease, which means doctor cause. And the worst part about it all were the last memories of my father, being a frightened and frail man. See, it didn't have to happen. But that happens countless times every day because the world doesn't know any better. This is like the Matrix. Whether you realize it or not, you've all been told the truth. And with truth comes responsibility. I don't believe we have the choice if we're sitting here tonight as to whether or not we're going to build a huge team and a huge organization. I believe we have a responsibility. Our country's been destroyed because we defend people's rights without supporting the need for human responsibility. And anytime rights become more important than responsibilities, this is the mess we're going to find ourselves in. But the way it got this way is one person at a time. And the only way it's going to change is one person at a time. You can make a difference, and how it starts is with you. You do what you need to do to maximize the quality of your life, and then you share it with others. And if they tell you they feel great and they don't think that they're toxic, and why should they do a liver cleanse in the first case? What do you tell them? Tell them just in case. Because if it's good enough for the treatment that results in the death of hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people every year, then it's good enough for a product that ensures a safe return to health.